To be, to become, to begin, where the river leans to the sea. To learn, to let go, to love. The world turns endless, turning me.
So we just decided that we're going to tackle something that's impossible, and I'm going to try to frame it, and then Jim, you add your framing, and then we just dive right in. So what we're going to try and tackle is, in my words, the participatory side of system change, the things that are ineffable, the things that we can put some words towards them, we can name them, but they can never be fully explained. So the picture I've had for this is a sunset. It seems that most people are somehow touched by a sunset, but there's absolutely no way to describe it to a point that that touching is transferred without actually being there as the sun sets. And I have the suspicion that much of the stuff around systems change is of that category. And so we try to address that a little bit today. I don't know how, Jim.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. You posed it a couple of weeks ago, and I go, part of my problem is I'm a great talker. I can talk about anything. But then as I step back, I realize that the talking and the doing are fundamentally different in these kinds of situations. You know, at a simple level, just think of ping pong, right? The game of ping pong. I used to be a damn good ping pong player. I even won my hometown's 4th of July ping pong tournament after having had 30 beers, my personal record. Still won the ping pong championship. But anyway, I can describe ping pong all you want, my strategies and everything else, but there's nothing quite like being in the flow where you are just playing ping pong. And particularly when you're in the flow state very strongly and you have some intuitions about things you can't express. Your hands are moving faster than your brain. Your legs are moving faster than your hands. And the whole thing is just this amazing gestalt that talking about it's valid, but talking about it and doing it are just completely different, right? And then, of course, we have the other examples of, friendship. We can talk about friendship, but, I recently had my oldest childhood friend come up to visit me for a couple of days. And it's hard to even describe how we were just sitting next to each other, right? And talking about this and that, and then not talking for a while, right? And the whole, again, the gestalt, the experience was far beyond words. And, I think part of systems change to a better way of human flourishing is getting ourselves more invested in those kinds of participatory things that are, I think a lot of the best ones involve something like flow states where you're out of the sequential processing in your brain, or at least the self-aware sequential processing. And it's happening at some deeper level and is being steered by things deep in the unconscious and in ways that are, I don't know if natural is the right word, but they're less stereotyped, and I think they're less constrained by kind of our external context. I mean, for instance, I could have a deep conversation with my best friend in prison, right? If we both happen to be in the same prison cell, it wouldn't matter. Instead we had one in our living room with 2 nice big comfy chairs side by side. That was nicer, but we could have it in prison. We could have it in a space capsule because the essence of the deep conversation with your best friend is just its own thing, irrespective of the framing of it, something like that. And if we move more towards that, that would be good. Interestingly related, I did a podcast episode this week with Iain McGilchrist. And who's written a bunch about the left brain and the right brain, and not in the pop cultural sense, right, but in the actual scientific sense. And the left brain wants to turn everything into words, while the right brain wants to be more intuitive, be more scanning, more integrative, etc. And I think there's something to that as well in this discussion. That, and he argues, and perhaps stronger than I have, but that Western civilization has been hijacked by the left brain at the expense of the right brain, and that in his worldview, the right brain should be what's in control, and the left brain should be the helper, rather than the other way around, which is where he argues we've ended up. So I think that has some perspective on the question that you asked.
Yeah, we can go down that balancing or rebalancing route between the right and left brain contributions. But before that, I want to explore something else which I find curious, and I want to hear whether you see something similar in that. I'm gonna hook it into the sunset again. I have yet to meet a person who doesn't somehow enjoy watching the sunset. I mean, a beautiful sunset, of course, right? Where the sky lights up in all sorts of colors, and where you're really deep in that experience. And it seems to me that the most fundamental experiences that have to do with ways of being in the world that are more conducive to life also seem to be very coherent in the positive nature they're experienced by almost anybody I know. Like being in community, being in friendship, being in doing something in community. I don't know, 2 weeks ago or something, I was picking coffee with a group of people. People were singing and chatting, and it was a very, very, very satisfying, wholesome experience that also cannot be really put into words. And it's so. Do you see something similar, and how would you describe that?
I think they're two different things. One is the private experience of something like a sunset or a beautiful rose, for instance. Right? My wife and I went on a 2-week trip out in coastal Oregon in September, and one of the places we went was this amazing rose garden in Portland. And we were there for hours, just wandering around, each of us separately, looking at roses, right? In the cognitive science literature, they use a red rose often as an example. That sense of redness of a rose is what's called qualia, the experiential way of looking at, or the experience of seeing something that is ineffable, and you can't really describe what it's like to see red. In fact, we don't know if my red and your red are the same thing, right? We know they're the same frequency, but we don't know if the experience of seeing it is the same. In fact, I remember asking my second grade teacher, I asked about the color blue and said, "Is your blue the same as my blue?" And she said, "Shut up, kid," basically. But I still remembered the question. I never forgot it, and it always has intrigued me. And then the second is the social aspect, a group of people watching a sunset, or in my case, very commonly is a group of people, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, always generally less than 10, sitting around a campfire at night and talking a little, but mostly just saying nothing, right? Singing a little bit, and particularly amazing in the wintertime, where the sky is so clear you feel like you can fall into it. You can see the Milky Way boldly, right? All the constellations are just like popping at you. But being there with a bunch of people, even if you're not saying anything, is an incredible experience. We're talking about it, but talking about it's nothing like being there and doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's two different things. One is perceptual qualia, and the second is being with people in many different dynamics while enjoying something like qualia.
Well, which is also essentially the same. I mean, you can experience being with others in a certain way, and you will never know whether that experience is even similar to somebody else. But somehow it seems that we know in us that it's similar. That there is, even though the exact way the color red or blue or whichever is represented in me as it is in you is less relevant as than the fact that the experience might be very similar, and we somehow seem to have an understanding that the experience is very similar. And that is what I find fascinating, right? That there seems to be and across culture. That's why I keep talking about the sunset or a campfire as a similar thing. Across cultures, there seems to be something shared in us that is us humans that gives us a very, very similar experience in those moments.
I don't know about that, right? This is interesting. For instance, I think there is a significant amount of cultural conditioning. For instance, in Western European and American pioneer culture, the woods was considered scary and bad, right? Think of all the Germanic children's stories of wolves and ogres and what have you. And, there's actually a fair bit of literature about this, about how nature was considered, especially woods that was not cultivated, was considered scary and bad and a place to stay away from. And people really shuddered to think about the dark woods. And today, there's many of us, including myself, who glory in going into the most remote woods we can find, the most natural. I still remember my wife and I sort of accidentally discovered this little cove in the mountains of North Carolina that was literally a virgin forest with trees 4 feet wide, meter and a third thick. And it was so thick there was no undergrowth, but there was flying squirrels going back and forth underneath this canopy. You go, holy moly! A European in 1500 would have gone, oh my God, get me out of here, right? So I do think there's some conditioning about what is beautiful and what isn't, what is moving and what isn't. And if we think about social change, part of the building of the culture is probably deciding collectively what is beautiful, what is experientially good, and at the same time, what is bad, right? I think what is bad may be as important. Sometimes people say, well, how do you know you're in a game B place? And I say, when a guy drives up in a Porsche and everybody laughs at him, that's a sign you're in a game B place. So rather than, okay, hell, when I was a 14-year-old kid, somebody drove up in a Porsche, I don't think I'd ever seen I'd seen a couple of like really old 50s vintage Porsches, but someone had driven up in a new Carrera or something, I would have run down there and looking at it, holy shit, that's the coolest thing I've seen in ages. When in reality, the proper reaction, at least in 2025, is, ew, what kind of a douchebag is that, right? And so I do believe that the reactions are significantly culturally determined, though at the same time, I find a hard time to imagine any culture that decides that sunsets are ugly, to your original point.
Okay. So how do we weave that into our question of systems change towards something that is more life-serving than what we do now? You said there might be a coherent portion, because something like a sunset doesn't have much of a benefit, or cannot be exploited, is not dangerous. So it's very neutral. So we can all relate to it in a similar way. We don't have to make up stories around it that shape it in any other way. But almost everything else could be shaped by culture, such that it gives us this common experience.
Culture, produces a collective sense, and then enculturates the children in what is, lovely and what is scary, for instance, right? And I think one should be somewhat thoughtful in making those decisions. Porsche, no, even though they are beautiful engineering artifacts. Virgin forest, yes. And that's part of the job of culture, is to help us come into a sense of beauty and, what's the word I'm working for here? Awe and such, that we as a group, and of course each person will differ to some degree, think helps make human flourishing. To be
so we essentially set up positions through story that are either more on the beautiful side or more on the stay away from that, on the dangerous side, right? So it's like the wolves in the forest, because that's appropriate to the way we should navigate the world. Right? If it's really dangerous for kids to go into the forest, and by the way, those stories usually are metaphors, not so much for the actual wildlife in the forest, but more for other ill-intended human beings. And that's often behind those stories of the medieval fairy tales in Europe or Germany. But it's cautionary tales. So, in other words, the one thing that needs to occur for a life-serving systems change is a deep change in culture of those stories. So we need to start coming up with new stories to tell, because stories is maybe an art, song, pictures, next to nature, one of the very few things that can invoke that kind of those kind of qualia, that in a way that's appropriate to our current culture and can experience it in a very similar way and help us navigate.
I had a thought as you were speaking. An interesting leverage point would be children's books. Just think how fundamental they are in setting some valences up, for the growing child, that, nature is huge and wonderful and mysterious and occasionally dangerous, but something to be cherished, while the shiny, expensive status game items are foolish, essentially. And one could imagine stories built around themes like that, that would help establish within a membrane, cultural traditions about what is sacred and what is valuable and what is repulsive. So that would be interesting. Other thought I had was a way to reinforce these things, and just good in its own sense, is conviviality around these events. In particular, I remembered when we lived up in Northern Virginia, we lived, 5 miles from the Blue Ridge Mountains. And on Friday afternoons, there was a completely informal convening up on top of one of the mountains that was close to us at a spot called Raven Rock. And you might have 50 or 100 people just show up to watch the sunset together. Sort of hippies, a lot of them, but not all of them. Some of them were old folks with walking sticks. At that time, we weren't too old. We were in our 30s and 40s. and people would have drums to be playing them and all this. And it was really something, I can tell you that. And completely unorganized. It was just a shelling point. Sunset on Raven Rock. I don't know how it got started or how long they've been doing it. We went a few times. It was very interesting. One could imagine, a more consciously designed ceremonial for Friday afternoon sunset in a community as a way to combine both qualia and conviviality together in one thing.
So sunset or similar occurrences as a secular replacement for the conviviality that the churches, for example, provide. Right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that could be a technique. Yes.
In other words,
That goes.
we pulled together groups of people to watch meteor showers, for instance, when the weather is right. Okay, let's come out and everybody lay back on the grass and just watch the meteor shower. Very interesting, and then it produces a group effect that's quite strong.
We actually experimented with something like that. Just sitting together, observing nature, and then sharing some thoughts and having a picnic. We're trying to institutionalize that more or less in our local community here. Unfortunately, we were too busy to hop around different places, so we didn't stay long enough to really institutionalize it. But it was, apart from the fact that it collided for several people who actually go to church, it collided with that, which could have been solved easily, of course. It was received very, very well. So it seemed to me when we did that people are actually looking for these moments actively, which to me comes down to an underlying thing that is required for this, which is time, right? When you talked about the kids' books, it takes a long time for kids to grow up and have that enculturated knowledge then change the world. It takes time to just be together watching a sunset, and if you spend that same time doing forex trading, you might feel more productive, right? But so might time be an interesting also point in this whole story about the ineffable and the qualia that we have commodified time in a way.
That's good. That's
Um,
right. That's right. That's right. Because think about it. How much ineffable qualia do you experience working in a cubicle all day, right?
mm,
Uh, Not much, right? Except maybe when you're
mm,
cheating or looking at a YouTube or something. But even then, it's pretty mechanical and flat.
mm,
And
mm,
and you think about the grinder culture of young wannabe entrepreneurs trying to put in their 80-hour weeks. How much time do they have or mental energy left for the kinds of things we've been talking about? The answer is not
mm,
much.
mm,
And if we go back to the foragers, which we often do when we talk about game B, uh, foragers in reasonably commodious locations tended to work about 2 hours a day, right? It wasn't that hard to make a living off the land before it got overpopulated. And the rest of the time they spent telling stories, handicrafts, sex, no doubt, seducing their neighbors' wives, all the fun things in life. And imagine if we get our society down to where it only takes 2 hours a day of work on average to keep things going. The time that we can invest in this is in these conviviality and experiential participatory things would be a lot. And fortunately, interesting thing, we're maybe at around the right hinge in history for this to happen. The combination of AI and humanoid robotics could reduce the amount of work, particularly if we're able to restrain our desire for more. That's the thing that could fuck us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, AI and robotics can produce an unlimited amount of shit, and I want an unlimited amount of shit, so bring it on. The turn would be, no, I don't need a mountain of shit. I need enough, and wouldn't it be great to have 2 hours of work and several hours of play and participation and qualia and making? It'd be wonderful if we could avoid the status games of saying, okay, we can have more, so let's bring it on.
And it does make one feel guilty at times, not engaging in the productivity game, in the doing mode, which is obviously connected to having mode, and just being in the being mode, right? Because everybody else around you is gathering stuff and doing stuff and having stuff, and then you feel guilty because you're not participating. So turning that around might just be one of the hardest, but also maybe one thing at the core of the whole system change conversation. The rewriting the understanding of what is right and wrong and what makes you feel guilty or not. Right?
Yeah, and I think it also comes back to status games. Humans, particularly males, are status-seeking animals, and if sitting there doing your Bitcoin trading gets you status because it gets you money, then many people will be drawn to that. If that is considered a weird-ass use of your attention, and instead the person who is participating in the community and going to the drumming at the sunset, and tending their beautiful flower garden, if that person has the higher status in that particular community, that will draw people towards those behaviors. So you have this, within the membrane, you have a metabolism of sorts going on, and part of the metabolism is what gives status, and that will draw people to what gives status. You got to be very careful about what gives status in the community. Because just like I say about salesmen's compensation plans, you'll get what you pay for, whether you want it or not. In a community, you'll get the behaviors that give status, whether you want them or not. So you got to be very, very careful in how you, how status emerges within a membrane.
So time, guilt, status. Are things that are in the way of us being able to just enter the being mode and experience qualia for their own sake. I'm wondering about levers that we can apply to help us shift this. Right. So in one of the projects that you also know, we're thinking about firing up the young ladies of a population in a certain country of the world to go on a sex strike until the guys have solved the things, and that might just be the strongest lever we have. I don't know, to change the status game, right? To say, okay, I cannot pitch up in a Porsche. I have to be doing the right thing, or be in the world in a different way, and that's when the shop reopens. Otherwise, I'm stranded.
That would work damn good if you get them to do it, right? Of course, we talked about earlier the defection problem and the group versus the individual. But yeah, if you could get solidarity, you could get some hellacious social change that way.
So, it feels a bit like we're circling here because the answer is quite obvious, right? We've tied status to the accumulation of financial power, and we have certain ways of extracting that financial power. And that creates, because it's the failing error correction of the finance game, that propels itself out of proportion, so that it becomes really, really hard to step up against it. Unless you create what you call the membrane around some people who have very consciously decided to step out of that game and start instilling another culture for themselves. Now, that is possible, and that might be satisfactory for those people, but it only really lands when we have the ability to really scale that up, right? Like hijacking the culture into a new shape. And I wonder, do we need something like a Netflix for Game B, that something like a Hollywood for those kinds of stories? And then there's another, and I'll just layer this on top, and then I'll let you go off on this. But there's another problem with this. Sunsets are incredibly beautiful, but they're also incredibly boring in a different way. So there's obviously much more excitement if there's an explosion rather than a sunset, right? So and that is what all of the storytelling of Game A feeds off, essentially.
Car chases and explosions. Right?
Correct. So how can we do we need how can we find ways to hijack the culture, and then how do we do that in such a way that it doesn't bore the hell out of us?
Those are very interesting questions, right? The growth dynamic, I think, is absolutely critical to thinking about Game B or any other major social change thing that's not a violent revolution, which is such a bad idea, because violent revolutions seldom end well, right? What we talk about, you're describing the difference between being outside and inside with respect to what things you do and value. And we refer to that in our theory as the currents. When you're out in Game A, the currents always seem to be in your face, slowing you down when you're trying to do the right thing. Okay, the worthy job doesn't pay nearly as well as being a foreign exchange trader does, or even a mid-level manager in the cubicle farm, and many other things. Think how you want to build something. It conflicts with the zoning and the building codes. But inside the membrane, in theory, if the membrane is designed in a truly Game B way, doing the right thing is supported by the environment and by the way people act and by the governance mechanisms, etc. And that'll make a big difference. And then in terms of growth, we do believe that outreach is hugely important to show that there is an alternative. So many people today believe there is no alternative. Tina, as Margaret Thatcher famously coined it, there is no alternative to Game A. If people actually see Game B, for instance, have a few Airbnb lodgings in your community. People can come and see it. Word starts to get out. There was a big back to the land movement in the U.S. in the early 70s, and it broke through to popular culture for a while. It was thought 400,000 kind of hippies went back to the land and beat up old farms and tried to build communes, and now they failed for a bunch of reasons. But there was a cultural breakthrough mini moment there in 72, 73, 74, and producing such a cultural breakthrough combined with a much better understanding of how these things have to be to actually work could produce a takeoff moment. And something like a movie studio, I think I'm not sure I'd have, maybe I would, should it be a Netflix or should it be a movie studio? Though, of course, the two are getting all tied up and interwoven, right? Netflix now is a movie studio and is in the process of buying another one. So there's some way to get deep cultural artifacts out into the world one way or the other. is an important part of the game. I would say early on, getting the artifacts is probably more important than the delivery vehicles, because we could use the existing delivery vehicles to deliver the artifacts. Get it up on Netflix, great, or Prime Video, great. Now, to the other question, though, this is an interesting one. How do we make it not boring, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, what do you want to go see? You want to go see the most recent car chase explosions movie, or do you want to see a bunch of hippies sitting on a beach looking at a sunset, right? And that's, I think, an interesting challenge to the artists. I kind of doubt that they're going to make movies about hippies sitting on the beach looking at a sunset. But there's always human stories. There's always conflict and problems in any social group. There's always adventures to be had. And, I'm sure it's well beyond, and I know it's well beyond my ability to think through what is both dramatic and moving and righteous at the same time. But that would be the challenge I put forth to the artists, particularly the younger ones, less set in their ways, to say, all right, how would you tell a story that it doesn't have to be situated formally in, say, a game B membrane, but it has to represent the values in a way that's nonetheless dramatic and interesting, and maybe allegorical. Think about the Greek myths, for instance. And one of the things that they all come back to is Xenia, which was the Greek law, essentially, of hospitality. If a person came to your house, a traveler, and needed a place to stay, you were morally and religiously obligated to give them one. And further, even if you were feudus, you belonged to different clans and hated each other, you also, by religious and moral ruling, had to behave yourselves and be nice to each other. And in fact, the thing that pissed Zeus off the most was if somebody violated Xenia, and he would fuck them over big time. And so there was an example of call it a good behavior, a good set of values that was inculcated into the culture, even against the grain, even against the grain of people that disliked each other. And it had some costs. Someone shows up at your door, you have to feed them and give them a place to sleep. But it makes for a better world. And so those kinds of things, might be some of the payload that artists way better than me could figure out how to tell stories that were both morally worthy and entertaining and attention keeping.
So we need something like the Medici family for Game B, right? So somebody to fund all of these artists so that they can do what they can start telling these stories.
We talked before about the fact that we need to have financial plumbing to make Game B work. One of the things that the hippies didn't have was we need significant capital. And if we can't find the financial plumbing to provide sufficient capital to not only start, but to grow the new kind of life, then we shouldn't do it, right? Otherwise it'll fail, just like it's failed again and again and again. So that's part of the challenge of doing it. And to some degree, the membranes themselves can be profitable at some level, and they're going to allocate their labor various ways. Part of it could be towards the arts, right? You can say, all right, we're going to support 2 or 3 artists in our community, and they do their art. They do their contribution to our culture and the broader culture through the art that they do. And there could also be higher level membranes that provide endowments for people that need, say, making film. You need equipment, you need crews, you need a significant budget that could endow those kinds of things too. So I do think that that's an important part of the overall design of the overall project. And again, it goes back to the reasons why we need the financial plumbing sufficient to do what needs to be done.
Do you think the Medici used their funding of art as a conscious vehicle for shaping culture? Or was it just a thing they did?
I don't know. Don't know that much about Florence at that time. I know a little, I know it a bit, but not a lot. Don't know if it was a status game. I know in Florence there was a status game of building these very tall, thin houses whose tower could be the highest. It was a status game. Whether supporting the great artists of the era was part of the Medici status game with other leading families, I don't really know. Or was it a culture jamming? I don't think so. I mean, it's not clear to me what a beautiful Michelangelo artifact. Not obvious to me what a widespread cultural effect that would be. Beautiful art, but not obviously programmatic.
Do you think it might be enough? So Indy Johar said this beautiful line to me about 10, 11 years ago. We were talking about AI versus human minds, and he proposed that there might be a possibility that the granularity of the human mind is infinite, meaning things like once we get past the car races and or car chases and explosions, we can get similar excitement from much more refined things like taking a walk through a rose garden for 4 hours. Um, so what we're basically saying here is we need stories of that caliber that touch into the excitement on higher levels of granularity of the mind, while also picking people up in a way that would rather go and watch a car chase, and help them lift into this higher granularity. Are we saying that?
I think we're saying it would be great if we could do it. uh, you know, part of the challenge is the way we're wired, right? We're wired that our brain lights up when there's an explosion or a car chase, and
So we need to find the things that light up in a similar way, but without, but in it towards an entirely different message, right? That's why I keep invoking the sunset, because that is ultimately a huge explosion itself, a just much slower one or further away.
further away,
Um,
mostly, right?
well,
That's it. Go ahead.
I recently caught myself being extremely bored out of my mind in a situation like that. I played the Monopoly Prosperity version of Monopoly with my older kid, and and the way this works is that the original implementation of Monopoly was designed by this young lady who was a big fan of Henry George, and she designed it around his ideas. And the first half of the game was in exploitative mode, which we know now as Monopoly. And then once it became clear who would be the winner, and we all know that moment in Monopoly, then the rules would change into creating a basic equilibrium between the players, such that um, the outcome of the game should be that everybody has roughly the same as in the beginning. So it took us about 2 hours to get to a point where it was very clear. I had I don't know, 100 tokens left, and my kid owned the bank. And then we shifted those rules, and we actually started playing by the original rules, and it became very, very clear very, very quickly that we would be playing for about 2 weeks without any major incidents until we reached the final goal, and it was so boring that we just stopped. Um, so I'm not entirely convinced that we can overcome this because I'm probably just as unimaginable equipped with too little imagination, just like you. to come up with something really exciting inside of that prosperity game. But I think that could be just the most exciting challenge for young artists and even young activists out there to solve this.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree that it may well be a rare person that's able to do the first examples. As we know in art, there's a
mm,
pioneer and then there's lots of copiers, right?
mm,
It's been true in film, it's been true in painting, it's been true in music, that there's schools. You can usually find one or two or three early genius founders of one of these movements. And maybe that's what we're, need to, find, help, or put the broadcast out, that looking for a genius to solve this interesting question. While you're saying that, though, I had another thought, which is watching movies, reading books, watching streaming shows on TV. These are all second person or third person activities, right?
mhm,
Perhaps part of the game is to turn the dial towards more first person activities. Playing cards with a live human being is a first person activity, as opposed to watching an explosion and car chase movie or even a sunset movie. Those are both the second or third person, depending on how they're pitched. And if we changed our ratio of first person to other modalities of being, that's pretty interesting. Because the qualia that we talked about and the conviviality we talk about are both really first person experiences.
mhm. So that leads back to something we talked about weeks ago, which is the institutional personal spiral, right? Doing things. It, what just came up for me is because it's so present here in my life is picking your own coffee, right? Um, there are enough places in the world where you can just go fly to, have a holiday, and also spend a day or two or three picking the coffee ration for your year, and then you fly back home and you have your own coffee, right? That's an entirely different experience from doing um, just going to the shop. And that could be done for many, many, many aspects of your life. Very, very, very easy, right? And having institutions that help you around you, that help you actually participate in your own consumption patterns more and deeply and directly um, is probably a door opener, right? Really, really satisfying, and at the same time, a much broader experience than just consuming a product.
Though I would point out that the carbon cost of that coffee is going to be off the charts. Right?
True, true.
And so it may be that you do the equivalent, but you do it in your backyard. One of the things that people do over in Highland County, where we spend more than half our time, is they make apple butter in the fall. And they'll go out to an orchard, often to an abandoned orchard, and we'll pick up all the drops. And then a group of people will get together and core the apples and throw them into the big pot and cook them together. And then they'll can them up, and everybody will go home with, a crate of apple butter. And that's something that you can do very locally, any place that has abundant apple trees, and even abandoned orchards, as there are quite a few up in the mountains hereabouts. The other one we have is making maple syrup, which is partially a commercial enterprise, but can also be a collective enterprise where people just come together and do it and share the results of the cooking and the gathering. So I think in a Game B context, orienting it towards your bioregion is probably wiser than flying off to Costa Rica, growing some coffee, and expending however many tons of carbon in the process.
Yeah, that's true. But in a German, for example, context, you could ferment your own sauerkraut, which I also just did, and also very satisfying because it's also extremely healthy. So, starting with the refinement process of some of the products in your life could just be a very, very easy way of implementation. But let's zoom back out maybe a little bit more. You mentioned earlier you had a conversation with Iain McGilchrist. Um, if you invoke that conversation, um, what's what comes up? What comes up between the right and the left brain, and how do we live into that more actively? Having said what we said in the last 50 minutes or so, to see what other perspectives could we invite here.
I don't want to put too many words in Ian's mouth, but his work tends to describe the left brain as linear and structured and rule following, and the right brain as nonlinear, much more scanning and taking in the present moment, and not necessarily being all that rule driven. So again, if we're thinking about what activities should a culture have, think about ones that are more nonlinear and more and less rule driven and less structured. And think about a fine example of that is, how do you think about education today in the sausage factory schools, where it's all about reading and seeing how fast you can do your multiplication tables and reciting the answers out of the history book. King George the Third, he was king for blah to blah, right? That's extremely left brain. And then if you go to something like a Montessori school, you have something that's got considerably more right brain aspects to it, where kids spend a fair bit of their time building things and interacting with materials and such. And so there would be a real leverage point in tuning the right brain and making right brain skills, improving right brain skills. Today's, going through from kindergarten through your PhD, it's mostly linear left brain. And suppose we really rethought all of that so that we exercise the right brain at least as much.
I don't know why that came up now, but I'm interested in music and also music theory to an extent. And so sometimes YouTube serves up these videos of people in a really left brain fashion, analyzing what the Beatles might have thought when they were doing some weird harmonic exercise. And they're trying to frame it through the lens of Western musical theory. But if you then go and watch what's it called? Let It Be documentary, does 8 hours or something of the Beatles actually making music, you see that it's very unlikely that they actually thought these things, right? They just played around and saw and felt what a certain chord combination felt like, and they said, hey, that sounds cool, let's do this, without having any of the theoretical background. I'm sure they had some, but they went for what actually felt right. And they did that as a group, mostly two, but still kind of a group, that were very, very, very much in tune with each other and knew each other very well, so they could easily bounce these ideas around and off one another.
Yeah, that's a good example, for sure. For folk music, popular where I live, where people get together and they jam for hours, where they're just one person will take the lead for a while and come up with a harmony or a melody from their little bank, and then other people will riff off that and take it a different direction. It'll go around for hours sometimes in a way that has a little bit of theory to it. There are some things that you do and some things you don't do in bluegrass music, but they don't. It's all in the moment creating this this live improvisation within a very broad set of mechanisms. Like that you would do. For instance, nobody's going to pull out a trumpet and start blowing a trumpet in the middle of a bluegrass number, nor will they use drums. Drums are verboten in this kind of music. It's just one of the boundary conditions. But within these broad boundary conditions, it's basically total freedom to experience in real time jamming with these other people who play along in a supporting role. When you're taking the lead, they know how to play along in a supporting role. Then you hand it off to somebody else. Very interesting.
And since I've made music in groups almost all of my life, I know that sometimes from the inside, in the process of doing it, it sounds absolutely amazing. It sounds like you're doing the most exciting things in the world ever. And if you then re-listen to the recording, it is absolute horseshit. And so that brings us back to the experience, right? So it wasn't to be recorded; it was to be experienced in that moment. The experience for the musicians and for the audience and for the dancers, maybe, who did something that was much, much larger than the sum of the parts that they put together to make this, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. So taking to heart the fail fast thing, right? Go and embarrass yourself and do something that potentially might fail, right? Is a very existentialist notion. I learned that from the French existentialists when I was about 15. You should embarrass yourself once a day. And you can only embarrass yourself with other people, right? You cannot embarrass yourself alone. So you have to be out there and you have to do things that you don't know how to do. And that experience then shapes you back, right? And I find that very interesting little hacks. Just pick up something, try to do it, fail, embarrass yourself, and try it again, but do it in community.
Yeah, I like that a lot because I think part of being a fulfilled human flourishing is to continue to grow across your lifespan, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't grow very rapidly if you don't take any risk. That's for sure. And being willing to fail, being willing to make a fool of yourself, I've never been afraid of that, is, I think, really important and useful and a good thing for people to consider.
Okay, so now it might be an interesting bridge. I really like Tom Chi's assessment of the best indicator of startup success, which is rate of learning. And learning goes beyond propositions, right? Real learning means that you have really deeply understood something to a level that you can integrate it into the next step. And that's not just understanding a proposition. So rate of learning on an individual, as an individual, could be a very interesting core measure that I really look up to people who show me that they are fast learners. And that involves things like admitting that you were wrong, right? Changing perspective, changing worldview, and these are powerful moves because they actually show that you're life and a human being that evolves, right? So that could be just a core measure. So for the girls out there, go on strike until you find somebody with a high rate of learning.
Yep, the right rate of learning, right? Because you could learn too fast, in which case you become ungrounded from your roots. I think you and I both know these people who are, the urban avant-garde, right? They feel like they have to be doing the new thing every 2 weeks. And the ones like that I know, at least, tend to be very active and adding many things to their collection of experiences, but at the end of the day, pretty shallow. because they never got into anything very deeply. They're chasing the new thing. And that doesn't strike me as what I think we're talking about when we're talking about continuous learning through a lifetime. It's a balance of looking at the new thing and also building strength in your previous experiences and your previous domains.
That's what I meant by being able to integrate, right?
Yeah.
The new is just a proposition. It's just a surface level. It's not fully integrated in your being. Once it's integrated in your being, then it counts as learning, because then you can use it for something else. Once you can lateralize something properly, that is a really good indicator that you've understood it deeply. Of course, again, that's hard to measure, but I've noticed that people who have mastered this, at least in one aspect of their life, they tend to have or radiate a level of confidence and security that I usually don't see in other people. So it's something that we can build antennas for, to recognize, has somebody cultivated this kind of behavior in themselves.
Yeah, and you also make the point about, let's say startups, early stage companies, and I've been involved in many early stage companies, looked at many more than that. And you're right, or Mr. Chi was right, that the ability to learn is about the most important factor in any company, early stage or otherwise. But the odds are so against an early stage company that you particularly have to optimize on learning in an early stage company. Of the 19 companies I've been involved with over my career, to more than a trivial degree, only one of them kind of just nailed their business plan from the get-go, right? Every other one had to dodge and weave and improvise and learn, or they wouldn't have made it. And like 13, 14 of them made it to a greater or lesser degree. And that was all about learning. Their original plan was, okay, got them in the ballpark, but then it was do. And the other thing I learned as I started maturing in my business career, and this is also included in major corporations, the business units, is the learning has to be multi-dimensional, which means that you have to have multiple people learning, right? In, let's say, a technology product company, I remember one in particular was a chip design software company. And there was a number of product things that weren't right. There were a number of UI things that weren't right. The sales approach wasn't right. And the sales engineering approach wasn't right. They were all close-ish, right? But the company became successful when it focused on all four of them. Okay, here are the four things we have to improve. And there were leaders for each, but there was also group conversation, almost Japanese-style quality circles. How can we improve each one of these? And if we improve them all, then our market will grow. In fact, I remember getting on a whiteboard at a board meeting and drawing a square, and say, a very small square, and say, this is where we are today. We have four legs, and they're all small. We have a few customers because what we have is good enough for them, but there are people nearby who either need better performance out of the tool, or a better user interface, or a better software engineering installation and integration process, or we don't know how to get to them because our marketing is not optimal. And if we grow each of these legs, then our square gets bigger and we become a bigger company. And the company did implement that as a meta strategy and ended up being successful. But it was only because they were able to grow in four dimensions. Probably they needed to grow for sure in two and probably three, but you grow in all four, and it was amazing how quickly the company turned around.
And how many iterations did it take you to invest in the people rather than the business case?
Yeah, in this case, that company only took about 4 years. That was a pretty fast crank. And another company using some of the same people took us 10 years, right? That we invested in a great team, many of them who had gone to the same college and in remote Canada. And so they had longevity together. And in 10 years, they were able to build a successful company, also in chip design software, and sell it to a big aggregator. But it took a long while in learning in many dimensions again to get there, and in more dimensions than any one person could hold in their own head. So it was a collective game of mutual learning in multiple dimensions that finally solved both of those. Though I will say on the second company, the market was changing too, so you had that additional factor to make it difficult. So you had to follow the market. The other market was pretty static, while also optimizing all the other pieces. And if the company had not been very superior at learning, it would not have succeeded for sure.
Well, I'm asking because of the example of Y Combinator, who are quite good at identifying promising companies. But they're not so interested in the business itself as they are in the people they fund, right? So they famously have this process of having three people have a conversation with the founders, and then if all three agree on a gut level that these are the right people, then they invest. And which, bringing it back to this conversation, is also qualia. Right. It's a feeling about a person that you get, and if you learn to trust that feeling, then you might just have found an amazing human being, and you potentially have an easier time filtering out the assholes.
Absolutely.
Which then in turn,
it was one of my superpowers in business. Not at first. My first hire was not good. But after I'd done a couple, two or three, I did start to use high dimensional qualitative feelings about people. I'd make pretty strong decisions one way or the other. I remember my biggest company where we were hiring, 10 people a week. And I interviewed every one of them before they got hired. And it would drive my hiring team crazy because even after they'd been through 6 interviews, I'd still reject 20% of them. And my team could tell whether it was a go or no go. If the person was out of my office in 20 minutes, they were a no go. They were there for more than an hour, they're almost surely a go. And I had all kinds of idiosyncratic ways of measuring people that were not at all the usual formal stuff. And I would call them kind of intuitive, high dimensional, experiential.
And you yourself being somebody who really looks at propositions and measure, and being in a world that values measuring a lot, how did you find the courage to trust that high dimensional intuition?
Well, I was the boss. I do whatever the fuck I want.
Yeah, still, but you could fail, right? So at least for yourself, you had to be able to.
Yeah, I don't know. I've always been a confident sort of guy, sometimes probably without much basis often. But if you talk about learners, I've always been a quick learner. What the hell is that?
Okay.
Something crazy just popped up on my screen. And so based on experience, I just felt myself getting better at it until the point where I stopped. I've had other people to do the formal stuff. Okay, does the person know the content of the job? Do they have the right resume? And are they at least superficially not insane and be reasonably good members of the team? But they were all working on a rubric essentially, and I just eventually found myself feeling confident. I don't really have any particular reason. I just saw that the people I was hiring were qualitatively different than a lot of other people organizations were hiring. So I kept doing
it. I many years ago in the software company, I decided to create an asshole-free zone, which is a bit like what you're describing, to ignore anybody and anything that would just give us superficial promises of money or skill or connection, network, whatever. If we felt they were assholes, we weren't interested at all. And honing this skill that you just described, right? The really trusting that sense that you get from a person. It took me a long time to really trust it because there are so many seductive elements often to that a person brings to the table that's to tell me, okay, I'd like to give that person a chance, but even though my intuition tells me not to, um, but I am really, really glad that I started practicing that skill more and more, so and to become better at it, so that it resulted in a spiral of amazing people attracting more amazing people, um, which to use the membrane language in a way then started growing a natural membrane by itself without intentionally trying to do so.
Yeah, the attraction of fellow beings that are on the same page is huge, right?
Hmm.
We get these really highly qualified candidates that we were in competition for with much bigger companies, and they would interview with 5 or 6 of our people, and then they would say, "Well, shit, I want to work here," right? Because these are,
Hmm. Hmm.
per capita, way better than your average drone out there in the world. And so, the more you get the right people, the easier it is to get get the right people. And I think the
Hmm.
same will be true for game beam membranes. That again, when people come to check it out, if they resonate with it, and of course we want the right kind of people to resonate. We don't want psychopaths resonating with us.
Hmm. Hmm.
Get the right kind of people resonating because they experience. Getting back to our experiential part, that this is qualitatively different than what I experience out in game A. Then we'll have a significant osmotic pressure of people wanting to come in. At least that's my bet.
And it's a personal growth tool as well, because if you find yourself trying to attract non-assholes, but you're finding you're having a hard time, you might just be an asshole yourself, right? So you have to also learn how to learn about yourself and grow yourself if you are on the asshole side, right? Which we all are sometimes. So we have to learn how to not be that.
And to take it to the
Yeah,
example of the membrane, if the membrane is not attractive to people, it probably should require some introspection on why not, right? You
yeah,
think you
yeah.
have the greatest thing since dope in a bag, but in reality, people experience it and they go, "Ew, I don't like this," right?
Mm.
Then sit back and take some time to understand what it is that you're doing and your way of being that is repulsive to other people, and it's an opportunity to learn.
Mhm. So if there's one thing to take away is that if you one really good way to get into a cultivation of the positive side of the ineffable qualia of the good things or the things that help you live towards a better way of doing things as a whole, then it's by starting to trust your gut specifically on other people, right? People you would like to be part of your membrane, if you want to use that word, um, and then find out why it's not happening, what needs to change that it's not happening, and either it's more trusting towards your own feeling, your own intuition, or high dimensional intuition, or it's something in you that needs to change, or in the cultural objects that you're using to attract the people. Right?
I think that's right. But I would also say that I believe that you want both. You want both structured and unstructured in
Hmm.
selecting people. If I'm hiring a C++ programmer, I want to make sure they can actually program in C++, that they're creative and in how they use the tools, etc. But I also want the ineffable aspect. Is this
Hmm.
person who is thinking, who is
Yeah.
into growth, one of my key rut bizarro questions was, in the last year, what's something you taught yourself that had nothing to do with work? And that's a really interesting question. But some people go, nothing. What are your hobbies? What do you do besides work? Watch TV, cut the grass. You're out of here, right? What was your last book you read? Some goofy ass business self-help book. Out of here, right? So you need both. And when we think about bringing people into a game,
a bunch of questions like that too.
Yeah. One of
my favorite one is weaving in out of the blue, like out of the left hand. What's your favorite addiction? That tells you a lot.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. I like that a lot. My CTO is a CTO at multiple of my companies, just a brilliant guy. One of his favorite questions was, how does a toilet work? Because he said, if an engineer has sat on a toilet, 100,000 times or whatever it is, and has never had the curiosity to open the lid and look, he ain't working for me, right? I always thought that was a good question. He also was a great hirer.
Or look at people's sinks at home. Find an excuse to go home to their place and see what their sink looks like. That tells you a lot.
Tell me about that. Not that I've ever gone to anybody's house during a recruiting process, but what would you look for in a sink?
Well, to me, it's a symbol of how good are you at procrastinating. So there's a certain level of procrastination that's okay, that's sometimes even beneficial, but if it becomes a habit, then it's not, right? And it's a place that is not public, that can be easily hidden from public. So I would see whether that person, like, I don't know, does the dishes at least once a day as a ritual or not, right? It's easily see that. And then somebody who doesn't, no matter what other attributes they have, I'm not interested.
Yeah, that would be measuring conscientiousness, probably. And again, as you say, I want a high but not highest level of conscientiousness. I want 85th percentile conscientiousness, because I want people who can play around and not just grind all the time. But I certainly don't want people who just never deliver either. Right?
Yeah.
So
maybe I see some hacks, right? So I prefer lazy people often, because lazy people usually find the most intelligent solutions because they don't want to do things twice. So
well, I'll tell you one.
things like that.
Here's a rut learning on lazy but brilliant people is they'll often bring you the first solution that'll work, and it may not be the right one. I had a guy that worked for me, brilliant guy, and he could solve almost any problem, but he locked into the first solution he came to. And part of my job with him was going, okay, T, that would work, but I'm willing to bet that is not the best way to do this for, in thinking about over long term, this code's got to last for 5 years or something. Why don't you go back and see if you can find a more elegant, less ad hoc and just sort of half-assed solution to this problem. And he'd go back, and almost every time he'd come back with a better solution. So there was a case where if all you were interested in is time, then this guy was great because he was so brilliant and so lazy. But if you wanted to build deep, you needed a boss to push back and say, all right, you can do better than this.
Yeah. I mean, laziness that involves the temporal aspect of deep time. I think that's the proper version of laziness. If you have to be responsible for whatever you're solving for the rest of your life, would that still be the best solution? If yes, okay, then go for it. If not,
that's again, in the business setting. I don't go for the rest of your life, but for the long haul, is this the right way to do this for the life cycle of this thing? Not just get it done, right? Yeah, it meets the requirements, right? All right. Well, I got to go here in a couple
me
of
too.
minutes. And
We're at the life cycle of this conversation.
yeah, this has been fun. We went this way, we went that way, but I think we had some pretty good convo.